First is that the contest between the US and China is much more equal than the contest between the US and the Soviet Union for a simple, really important reason, and that is that China's economy is as big as America's, functionally. And how reassured or alarmed should we be by the similarities and differences? Well, let me just start by very quickly listing some of the obvious ways in which it is just like the Cold War, in which it's not like the Cold War. The first is, of course, that people always point out too, is that during the Cold War, the Soviet world and the West were almost completely separate economically, whereas today the economic integration is like that. A second is that the integration is not just economic but social and human. There's enormous connectivities at every level between China and the West, between China and the United States, including a huge amount of people movement. The third is that the contest today lacks the sharp ideological edge of the Cold War between capitalism and communism. Now, there is a sort of a question about that in some people's mind, and I think it's an issue that's interesting to discuss. But as a broad proposition, I think that's right. I don't think what we're seeing here is a clash of ideologies. I think it's much more a traditional clash of power political ambitions. And the fourth way in which it's obviously different is that China doesn't have a bloc the way the Soviet Union did. The Soviet Union led a big group of nations, relatively powerful nations, some of them. And China doesn't. China is much more alone. And there are significant ways in which the Cold War today is not like the old Cold War, and the ones that are often cited in the debates you see in the literature. The less obvious, but I think in some ways more important way in which the analogy is obviously incorrect is that China's aims are very different from, I think China's aims are very different from the Soviet aims. The Soviet Union, at least at the start, really did aim to dominate the world. And that, and in a way that I'll touch on a bit later, that was not an impossible, not a wholly implausible objective for the Soviet Union to have. And so it really was a rival with the United States for global hegemony. China, I don't believe, is that. And again, I'll explain why I think that in a little while. But China's ambition is to become the dominant power in East Asia and the Western Pacific. That is itself a very radical, very significant, and in many ways very disturbing ambition.